Joy. I run security at Alto Pharmacy, which is a full-service pharmacy, and we build all of the software to operate the pharmacy in-house. So I think a lot about privacy in addition to security, and wanted to talk today about a game I play with my daughter called Candy House. There we go. Candy House is basically a way that I've been teaching my daughter and now my son threat modeling since she was a kindergartner. The update, of course, is that my daughter is now in 4th grade, but we still actually play this game, and it has definitely inspired some creative thinking on her part, and she may be getting lockpicks for Christmas this year. But this really started with one day I was walking. She had come with me into the office for a bit, and we were walking home, and she asked me what I do when I'm working. And I usually say things like, oh, I just sit there and play with a computer all day, or clean up other people's messes. But had some time to kill, so I decided I would try and explain it. I actually keep people's private information safe. This wasn't really as impressive as I would have liked it to be to her, but I decided maybe we can make this more exciting. Let's imagine it's November 1st, and this is, of course, a very timely talk today. And last night was an excellent candy haul. So much candy, bags and bags of it. How would you feel if you brought all this excellent candy home and someone else ate your candy? So this was kind of the question I asked her. And of course, you know, she does not want to share candy. I'm actually super stingy as a mom about sweets. So Halloween is definitely a highlight of her year because she gets all this candy and we get to eat it for the next few weeks. So I asked her, well, who are the people most likely to eat your candy? And her immediate response was her brother and me. I definitely have a sweet tooth. So, you know, she worries about me getting access to her candy when she's in bed and maybe helping myself to a couple treats. But also her brother, who is notoriously sneaky, is definitely a bit of a threat actor here. So the solution we came up with is she needs a candy house. So first pass at this was a picture she drew of her candy house. Notice that there's some deceptive signage over there saying that it was a place for rotten potatoes. There's a nice door. There's some bars on the windows. She's got a lookout telescope at the top. But we had to talk a little bit more about this. So first of all, if you've got this candy house, how do you get in? And she's like, well, obviously there's a lock. And you know, I'm like, well, why can't the candy thief get in the same way? So, you know, she's got a key. Well, where do you keep that key? And again, as mentioned before, little brother is sneaky and mom sometimes works from home. So where do you keep the key? You know, if you take it with you to school, what happens if you lose the key? If you have a spare key, who holds onto it? Does your best friend hold onto it? Well, what if she loses it too? Also worth mentioning, does mommy know how to pick locks? Because the other day she had locked herself, she had locked the bathroom door and then exited it. And so I was the person who then went and managed to reopen the lock. So she's a little suspicious of me around locks as well. So moving on from locks, the next question was, well, could someone just break in? You know, what is the structural integrity? Her initial proposal for a candy house had actually been a gingerbread house because she was very excited by the concept of a house you could eat. But then she realized that does not have a ton of structural integrity. You know, what are the ways that you could go through the walls? Well, what about doors? Can you take them off? One thing we actually did when we were playing this game was we went and looked at doors and noticed that when you were talking about the door to your house, the hinges are installed in a way that you can't just unscrew the hinge in order to get the door off and come inside. But then we started thinking about, well, what about windows? You know, could you climb in windows? Are there chimneys? You know, all these different ways that you could potentially get into a house without actually going through the intended door. We have other variations on Candy House that we've actually played. One is where we start saying, well, her best friend wants to store candy in my daughter's candy house to protect against her brothers. So how do you actually make sure that best friend can only eat her own candy versus your candy? Or how do you know that how does she know that you won't eat her candy? So we're now talking about a multi-tenant threat model that we're building. Also, keys are easy to lose. How else can we limit access? And this is one where she got really excited because she's like, oh, of course, I want to have a fingerprint lock like your phone has, or a Face ID, of course. And she we got very excited about this as well. Also, we talked about passwords, but how do you choose good passwords? One factor there is that she has certainly managed to figure out several of my passwords by looking over my shoulder, so that's still a concern. And then just with these different characteristics, what are the things about you that don't change? Could you have someone? She proposed having a security guard, which I didn't get into her on how you staff such a position, but what could you actually have validate about you? Because if it's your appearance, her little brother actually looks quite a bit like her. With the right wig, he might be able to pass for her if you didn't have a very good security guard. So all of these were things we've talked through as we're building out our different threat models for our candy house. But yeah, my kindergartner built a threat model. I think that's the main point here, is that it turns out as you are walking through this, it's very natural for someone to start thinking about what are the threats if you put it in a context that they understand well. So then we moved back to reality. Like what I had talked about, well, what do I do? And one of the things I do is I keep people's private information safe. So we talked about what kind of information people trust my employer with. Again, we're a pharmacy. Actually, when I started doing this game with her, I wasn't working at a pharmacy, but it was still a place where people provided us with a lot of information about their medications, their health conditions, even things about where they live and their other characteristics about them. And we talked about what is the value of her private information. There's lots of information about her that she might not want to be exposed to the public. Like she certainly doesn't want me sharing information about how she didn't brush her teeth last night with her classmates. That's not something that she considers public information. So we had that conversation, and I also put in here just some references to places that I found some really good resources on talking to children about privacy, like some games and things like that, because this wasn't a new conversation for us. We had talked about privacy previously. So this was all something that she and I did off and on over like literally a year. And then one summer I signed her up for this camp called Rock Band Land, which is quite possibly the coolest summer camp in San Francisco. It's a bunch of kids go and they spend a week writing a song together, learning to perform it. And then at the end of the camp, they have a rock concert that the parents all attend. So she was really excited when I first signed her up for this. And I had showed her a bunch of videos, and her cousin had attended it. But then a week beforehand, she was actually really anxious and did not want to go. And she eventually shared with me that the reason why was because I had showed her these videos of other children participating in this camp, and she did not feel comfortable having strangers on the internet watch a video of her. So this was actually really interesting to me to see her having built her own threat model of things she's comfortable with and not comfortable with, and eventually be able to communicate back to me that, oh, I'm not comfortable with this. So we talked about, well, what are the ways that we could prevent this? How could we actually protect against this thing that she's worried about? So we talked about photo and video consent forms. And one of the things my husband and I as a policy don't do is sign these. And we're always those annoying parents that cross out lines and things like that. And so, I told her that, but also we actually wrote an email to the camp director and expressed that this was something that she had a concern about, and they're lovely. And so the camp director actually made a point of going up to her on the first day and talking to her and making sure she understood that he wasn't going to take any videos and share them unless she was okay with it. And she had an amazing week. It was a great camp. But to me, it was a real turning point of seeing my daughter not only building a threat model, but using it in practice in order to advocate for her own needs and make sure that she had the right controls in place. But yeah, you don't need a CISSP to threat model. I notably do not have one. It's something that's actually very natural to humans when you communicate to them in a way that they understand. So the big question here is, well, how do we apply this to our work? Because, you know, it's obviously a fun thing to do, and I encourage any of you that do have children to have these kinds of conversations with your children. But how do we actually, on a day-to-day, apply this to our work? First thing is, anyone can threat model. I think there's more and more of a movement within security to start pushing for a lot of security processes to be done by non-security folks. If we introduce this concept repeatedly and we build out a lightweight training and model for doing threat modeling, maybe making a game, we have the opportunity to get more people thinking about security and making informed decisions about security. And I didn't actually put them in this slide. I have them in the notes here, but there are a couple good resources. Duo actually has a great little pamphlet that you can use if you want to run these kinds of trainings internally. Other places have certainly published them. There's the escalation of privilege card game that I think many of us may have played, or if not, you should try it out. I think I am basically advocating for, I've read all the textbooks and, you know, Stride and Pasta. There are these really formal approaches to doing threat modeling, which can be really useful, particularly if you're trying to build a particularly secure system and advocate for particular changes. But on a day-to-day basis, if we wait till these big threat models, on a day-to-day basis, we will make decisions about security without that information. And so we're better off actually figuring out how we can make threat modeling as easy as possible and get as many people as possible to do it, because we're going to identify, you know, threats that we as security professionals might not have even considered. As I said, I didn't even consider, you know, what could have been causing my daughter's reluctance here. It really took her being able to communicate to me about her threat model and why she felt that this this camp was actually potentially a concern. So basically, yes, first of all, let's start with developers. This is something that we've actually done at Alto. It's something that we are adding to our standard onboarding training for every single engineer. You know, they have a onboarding project that they do. And actually one of the things we're looking to do is make part of that. You build your your starter project, and then you do a threat model for it and you document that threat model. Because if we got developers doing threat modeling every time they go and build a new feature, even if their threat model is not complete and fully thought out, that's a starting point for a security person to come in and say, oh, this is great. Have you thought of this one? Because they know they've already considered these other more obvious threats. I think that one of the places that I've had less opportunity to do it than I would like, but I've definitely, we're actually talking right now about is building out some threat modeling exercises for our pharmacists who are working in physical pharmacies. Physical security is not my area of expertise, so I don't think that I necessarily can identify all the threats that they have to worry about. But I know I have these amazing experts who have run pharmacies in all different kinds of places that can tell me about what are the threats that they've actually seen in practice. So if we can get a pharmacist threat modeling, we can identify what are some realistic mitigations we can put in place in our pharmacies. Patient care is the team that we have on the phones with all our patients. And one of the major concerns we have there is social engineering. And I can sit there and talk about standard social engineering, but again, I don't have the domain expertise about the conversations they're having, the patients they're talking to. So getting them to be threat modeling is a great way for us to identify realistic, practical mitigations that we could apply for social engineering. And then my sort of galaxy brain moment is patient threat modeling. You know, any place we could actually get our end users, our customers, our patients in my case, to do their own threat modeling and think about what are they worried about, that's great. So, you know, if you start to offer configurable security controls in your end user apps, that's where, if you can also provide your end users the ability to reason about their threat model and then determine which controls they want to turn all the way up and which ones they don't necessarily feel are appropriate for them, that's where we're really at the galaxy brain moment. But yeah, that's kind of the way I think about threat modeling. So I actually rushed through this. Wow, I was worried about having enough time. I can talk more about threat modeling, but I think the main thing here, I also would like to put it, I drew one of these pictures and my younger son drew the other one. I think that the main thing here is that threat modeling absolutely should not be something that you have to be a security engineer. You have to have gone through, and read a textbook about the STRIDE method, and you shouldn't need 4 hours to go through and do this exercise. It's something that you want every engineer to be spending like 30 minutes per project on a threat model. And then if it's a big project, maybe you get the whole team together for an hour or two. But if you have engineers doing 30 minutes up front, and then you have an hour or two of follow-up, you're going to get really good threat models that have a much broader set of threats. And I think the thing, I'd love to get questions, because I can talk about this. Actually is a talk that I gave previously, and I zhuzhed up because it was very appropriate timing-wise to this event. But as I said, one of the things I could talk about is essentially the way we've decided to make this a formal part of our process at Alto. As I said, the main thing for me is we're rolling it out as part of the onboarding thing and making it part of that starter project. And actually capturing, we have a standard starter project where you have to go through and document a bunch of tasks, and the completion of all of those tasks is mandatory before you get to start working on production code. And it goes all the way up to checking code in. So putting this as sort of similar level of, before you actually get to check in production code, you have to have gone through a review process on an example PR. Similarly, before you're actually building out features, you're going to have gone through and gotten sign off on a threat model. That's where we're looking to move forward. And then the other piece is we do have regularly scheduled threat modeling with one of our teams, and then we do ad hoc threat modeling. The infrastructure team, we do regularly scheduled threat modeling. We just work our way through different things they're working on. And then we offer ad hoc threat modeling for each of our other teams. So it might be, for example, if we're working on biometric authentication, that's a great opportunity for us to introduce a bit of threat modeling so we can identify requirements for that project. So as I said, would love to get questions here, if anyone has any. I think last time I gave this, it was a 20-minute talk with 10 minutes of discussion. So I was hoping I got some engagement here. Okay, then I will talk more since we have time. I'll go back to this one because I think this was something people reacted well to. I could talk more about sort of what are the threat models that I'm trying to roll out. I think I mentioned, oh, here we go. So deeper dive on the foundation of threat modeling. The classic book is, I'm forgetting his name, Adam Shostak's book. That's a lot of people refer to that. I actually really like, there was an earlier book that came out of the Microsoft team as well. Wendell Snyder was one of the authors, and it's still fairly formal, but actually what I like about it is there are a couple early chapters in that book that, and I would get references, but my copy of the book is actually in the office that I have not been in for a year and a half. But I will do some research and see if I can find it in Google Books. But I really like some of her early chapters, and I almost would say you can start with some of the early chapters because they really introduce more the philosophy and kind of general thought process for threat modeling, and then they go into a more formal method. And that's generally what I advocate highly for, is focusing on that initial sort of philosophy. I also think a good way to practice, again, I mentioned this elevation of privilege card game. I think it's actually a really good way to practice because it's sort of like kind of can make you more explicitly go through every step of it. So I think it's a nice, and it's an open source. You can actually download and print out the cards yourself. And those are kind of my usual go-to resources, those two books and the game. But in terms of resources to sort of play around a bit more with ways you can make it fun, Duo has, I have to actually look, it's in the, let's see, it's right here. Duo has here we go. Security story time is what they call it. And there's a little PDF, and if you just search for Duo Security Storytime, you'll be able to find it. And it's a really good, Adam Shostak's book is the one. I think my feeling on the Shostak book is it's very much the very formal approach. And as I said, I'm actually not the biggest fan of that. It's also, I feel like there's a PDF version of it floating around too. But yes. So I would recommend also the Duo little pamphlet. The reason I say that is it's great for if you got together a group of people, you can just kind of do really informal practice exercises. I did that with the entire engineering team a couple times, just to kind of, before we started talking about how we would more formally build the process, we did do exercises where I just invited engineers and I gave them the Duo pamphlet and had them each pick. I think we focused on trying to come up with different threats to, how would you steal controlled substances is the fun one to do in a pharmacy, because that's actually one of the, there's sensitive data, but actually a major threat that a lot of people don't think about is controlled substances are a major concern for us. So, how could you as an engineer, how would you actually attack our production systems if you were trying to illegally dispense controlled substances? So that was a big one we like to play around with. And it was a good exercise for people because it got them to think outside their standard. Like, they do think quite a bit on a day-to-day basis about confidentiality, but having them actually think about this threat was something that they don't do as much. So that was, as I was going to say, in terms of the threat models I worry about, the pharmacist threat modeling was really about that controlled substance theft, because that is actually a huge concern. The patient care threat modeling, one of the other threats that we worry quite a bit about in the pharmacy is individuals who are not authorized calling in and able to either access medications or access information about our patients. And so that's the major social engineering threat that we definitely think that threat modeling with patient care could be really impactful. And I could see in a lot of places doing threat modeling with your call center and customer support people is actually something that people should be thinking about more. I think we all know that social engineering is a huge threat. And there's standard ways to approach social engineering that certainly help, but it turns out most organizations have a lot of specifics that, culturally and in practice contribute to the threats. So if there is a standard practice of, I recently read somewhere about AAA, if you claim to have a baby locked in a car, they will put your ticket to the top of the stack. And so that's very specific knowledge that you might not know as an average user, but if someone does know that, they can manipulate the behavior of AAA just by making a claim that no one's going to validate, of course. So how do you actually handle those calls? Do you handle them differently, or do you make assumption? You might make an assumption that they're always right and accept that risk. But I think the main point there is that you have to actually talk to the people who are in a call center or in a patient care and understand, what are sort of your exceptional processes? If someone came in and was trying to make you do something, what are the things that actually could allow them to bypass your standard process? And I, as a security person, often won't know those, but the person who is actually on the phone is going to know those. It's also, well, if you don't know what to do, where do you go? And could someone manipulate that some way? And so these are the kinds of threats that really don't show up in just casual conversation. And they may show up in a very formal threat model, but if you don't, I think we often don't do that formal threat model for every system. So if we can actually start threat modeling every system by making it lightweight, that's where I think threat modeling can be a much more useful tool. And I say this as someone who's done it in a very formal way at previous organizations and absolutely it identifies really useful threats, but it doesn't get you that complete picture that you can get from getting everyone involved in the exercise. So I think I have 1 minute left. I appreciated getting the opportunity to talk to everyone about this, and thank you to those who were able to drop in some questions. I'll put this into the resources in the Slack channel, and definitely feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Happy to connect with folks.